So now, when we begin, as usual, the first thing I always speak about is our motivations, because what really makes a difference in terms of what we're doing, how is it going to turn out, the main thing is our motivations. Of course, you can have a good motivation and things can go wrong. But if you start out with a bad motivation, it's very difficult. Unless you change your motivation, it's difficult for it to become good. Even if it looks good on the outside, if the motivation is bad, then the action is going to be, it's going to be hard for the action to really be good. So in everything you do, it's important to think about your motivation first. So I'd like to ask you all to please begin by just having as good a motivation as you can, thinking that we want to do this to bring benefit for ourselves and for all other beings. Whatever level of benefit that is, whether it be the benefit in this lifetime, if we think about future lifetimes benefiting people in future lifetimes or bringing them to liberation and omniscience, as we speak about in Buddhism. And so just have as large a motivation as you can. We have a few people here of different levels, some people whose level I just really don't know, some people who are new, some people who've been around for a while. So just have as good a motivation as you can, as is appropriate for where you are right now. I think with the motivation, the thing to do is to look at what your actual motivation is, and then to try to make it a little bit better. Try to think, can I have a slightly bigger motivation? Or can I have a much more vast motivation? And take it in steps. So, in this way, please listen with a good motivation. And so for the past few weeks, I've been giving these, past few months, I've been giving these weekly Introduction to Buddhism talks. And we have been talking a little bit about Buddhist history, and then particularly in the last 3 or 4 weeks, been speaking about basic Buddhist ideas. But there's one big idea I haven't really talked about yet. Samsara and Nirvana. Or is that 2 ideas? Maybe it's 2 ideas. At any rate, there's Samsara and Nirvana. Now, it's not like this is actually really different than what we've been speaking about. We've spoken about the Four Noble Truths. We've spoken about the five aggregates, karmic cause and effect. And so now when we think about, well, if you kind of put it all together, what do we get? Essentially, when we talk about all this, we're talking about different ways of looking at our experience. I mean, Buddhism isn't about developing some sort of extra idea about some metaphysical thing, something like some Platonic ideal or anything like that. It's about looking at our experience and seeing what it is. And so when we look at our experience, we see that everything's coming out of causes and results. Our bodies, our minds, everything around us are coming out of cause and results. And this leads us from moment to moment and can take us even from lifetime to lifetime in Buddhism. So what we talk about, what we call this is actually the cycle of samsara. Basically, when we say samsara, what we're speaking about is the experience that we have as ordinary sentient beings, where we don't really understand how to work with the causes and results. And as a result, we often make bad choices with good intentions, but if you make a bad choice even with a good intention, then that also is difficult. We want to be happy ourselves, but we don't know how to bring ourselves happiness. And so we often act out of attachment of wanting to get things or keeping things for ourselves. And often that leads to greed and other greed and covetousness and so forth that then motivate us to act in ways that will cause suffering for ourselves and for others. Maybe not in the short term, but at some time in the future. Or sometimes we see things that we don't like and we want to get rid of it. We feel aversion or anger or so forth for other things. We act out of that. And then it's pretty easy to see how that creates suffering in the short term. And it can also create further sufferings further difficulties in the future. Because everything we do makes an impression, as we were speaking about last week, right? Everything we do makes an impression on our subconscious, deep in our mind. Those impressions that we make in our mind will then, in the future, kind of ripen as things that come back as experiences that we have in the future. So we have to be careful about what we're putting into our mind, what we're collecting in our mind. So if we don't understand what we should be doing, and instead continuing acting out of our greed and everything that comes from greed, out of our anger and everything that comes out of anger, aggression and so forth, contentiousness and so forth, or if we act out of ignorance of not understanding things, then we act out of those, that makes an impression upon us, and that creates problems in the future. Some of these problems are problems we can see in this lifetime. Sometimes you have an experience, you do something once, and then you don't realize what's going to happen, but you can see that there's an effect that comes up maybe years later, and you realize, oh, that is because of this. It's similar with karma. But with karma, we talk about it also taking course over from lifetime to lifetime to lifetime. So the idea of karmic cause and effect and of multiple lives and rebirth, this is all put together in the idea of samsara. And this is a really important Buddhist idea of samsara. It's actually not just an idea. It's a way of looking at our world and seeing that we go from our bodies and minds go from moment to moment to moment, and at some point when the body dies, then the mind then goes on to the next, eventually into a new rebirth and so forth. And these rebirths can, traditionally we talk about taking rebirths in 6 different realms. Like this human realm, we consider one realm, because all of us as humans, we have certain commonalities. I mean, there's a lot of differences too, but we all have commonalities in that we have a fair degree of intelligence. We can think for ourselves. Often we also have just enough leisure and resources where we actually have the time. Not everyone has the time in their lifetime. Some people are in very difficult situations, of course. But many human beings, if they have the interest can take the time to think about what can they do to make their lives better. And I think you find this all around the world in all different cultures. This is very common. I mean, even in what we would normally consider less developed cultures, the people have ideas about what do you need to do to be happy. And so this is similar in Buddhism. Thinking about what do we need to do to be happy. So we have to know what to do in order to be happy. So in the human realm, we have this opportunity to learn, to study, and to think. And particularly, we have the opportunity to come into many different ideas and thoughts that can bring us greater happiness. And I'm not going to limit this to just Buddhism. There are many different ways of thinking and different schools and so forth that can bring benefit to people. And so we all have the opportunity to do that. So that's like the characteristic of us in the in the human realm. Another realm that we can see is the animal realm. And of course we always think about, when you say animal realm, you think about the cute animals that we all like to think, the dogs and the other fluffy mammals and so forth, the cute birds and so forth. But actually there are all sorts of different animals, right? There are just millions of species of animals on this world alone, let alone what there are on other worlds. And on a certain level, the animals are pretty much the same as us in that they're all aware. They all have minds. They all want to avoid pain. They all want to get food and the other things they need to live. So they all want to bring themselves pleasure and happiness. They want to avoid suffering. So they're the same as us, but the difference is that the animals don't have the same intellectual capacity as we do. And they end up often spending their lives eating or being eaten. We're trying to run away, looking for something that they can find in a place, and then there are other animals who want to eat them, and they have to be careful of them. All the fish in the ocean are always in a constant race to try to eat smaller ones, or even smaller animals, before they're eaten by a larger one. And so there's a lot of suffering in the animal realm of one eating another and trying to avoid being eaten, as well as the difficulties of sickness and death that come to all beings. In Buddhism, we also talk traditionally about realms that we can't see. We talk about the realms of the gods. This would be like realms of the gods like the Greek gods or the Hindu gods. In particular, it's the realms of the Hindu gods. We consider them to be beings who are born in a really nice situation. And they have lives of great pleasure. It's traditionally taught that they can live for millions of years without ever having any difficulty, until just a few days before they die and they realize what is going to happen. Because in Buddhism, we speak about the gods also being mortal. We don't have immortal gods. No being is immortal. Once you are born, because you are born, you have the cause of death. Once you are born, the only thing that is certain in your lifetime is that you will die. And this is the same for gods as it is the same as it is for humans. Their lifetimes are millions of years, so they appear to us as if they are immortal. But traditionally it's taught that they're not, that the gods do die and pass away. And when they die, they see what's going to happen in their next lifetime. They experience a terrible psychological suffering. It's also taught that there are demigods who are they're not quite on the level of the gods, but they're very envious of the gods, and it causes them constant strife and difficulty. They experience a lot of suffering because of their envy and their jealousy. We also talk about there being hungry ghosts. Traditionally, these are beings who are born in a place where they just can't find enough food or drink. And they live, but because of their karma, they can't die. And so they live extremely long lifetimes where they can't ever find any food or water. And we also talk about there being hell realms, which are similar to the descriptions of hell realms we see in Western literature and Western thought, places of just great and unceasing suffering. So we talk about these 6 different realms, from the gods, the demigods, humans, animals, hungry ghosts, and hells. But of these 6 different realms, as humans, we can really only see our own realm and also the animal realm. There are realms that we cannot see. So this is how it's traditionally explained. And when we talk about these different realms, I think one way to understand them is like, a common way it's spoken about is if you look at the causes of the realms. For example, being reborn in the hell realms is a result of hatred and anger. So if you look at your mind, when you are experiencing a moment of anger, you look at the intensity of that anger, that is in a sense an experience of the hell realm. The only difference is that for us humans, usually the anger passes. So it's like when you do something out of anger, then that creates a habit of anger in your mind, and later in another birth, you might find yourself in a place where you're just continually experiencing that anger in the form of external appearances, of it seeming like beings trying to continually harm you. But you can look at the seed in this lifetime. You can also look at like when you're feeling a moment of pride or arrogance. You feel like really you're doing great, everything's fine. You look at the nature of that, it's like the nature of being in the God realms where everything seems wonderful. So if you look at the causes of the rebirth, be it pride for being reborn as a god, or envy for being reborn as a demigod, stinginess for being reborn as a hungry ghost, or anger and hatred for being reborn as a hell being, if you look at the nature of the causes of the pride, the jealousy, the stinginess, or the hatred, if you look at how those are now, then that's creating a habit in your mind that later, when your mind is loosened, is released from the attachment to this body, the body no longer can support it. The mind has to go on someplace else. And then you end up in the other realms because of the intense habits of your mind. So this is the way it's commonly taught traditionally in Buddhism. And of course, this is something that for many people on the first time when you hear about Buddhism can be difficult to accept. So if that's your situation, that's okay. There's no problem with that. You just keep an open mind. That's what's traditionally taught. Think about it. Look at your experience. Look at the nature of what's going on in your mind. And see for yourself how much of it accords with what you experience. Of course, it's all predicated upon the idea that our minds and our body are kind of a little bit separate. And that in Western thought, we'd say that it's dualistic, that there's a mind and a body. Of course, if we look at it in terms of the Buddhist teachings, it's more than just dualistic. I mean, mind and body are separate, but mind itself is not really a single thing. The body itself is not really a single thing. They're all many different factors put together. But they're continuums of mind and continuum of the body. And the mind, sometimes we have moments of awareness that cannot be accounted for physically. One that has come up in recent medical research is like you have people who have near-death experiences, people who have, say, cardiac arrest. Their heart ceases, the activity in the brain also ceases, and yet people have awarenesses at that time. Often they have the awareness and visual awarenesses from other perspectives, as if they're looking down, and they can relate what happened while they're in a cardiac arrest. Then later the doctors revive them, and they can tell what happened. Tell the doctors what happened while they had been officially dead. And so this shows, it doesn't show necessarily much about it, but it shows that there is possible to have awareness separate from the functioning of the body. So when that happens in the course of this lifetime, then when the person really completely dies and the body is totally unable to support the consciousness, then the consciousness will continue. And it goes on and creates the appearances of the next lifetime. So this is what we call samsara, and it goes in like a cycle. You have one birth in one realm, and then depending upon what you do in that lifetime or what you've done in previous lifetimes, when you die, then the seeds that are in your subconscious will arise as the next existence, and so forth in a big cycle. So we've taught about this, the Buddha taught this as the idea of samsara, so a cycle of existences. It's taught that it's very easy to go down, down into the lower realms, and very difficult to come up into the higher realms. The reason for this is if we look at it, how often are you acting out of desire or anger? How often do you act out of positive thoughts like generosity or faith, loving kindness or compassion? We all have a mix of these in our daily lives. If you look at it, then if you haven't really tried to do anything to train your mind, there's a good chance that the actions motivated by greed, hatred, envy, pride, and so forth are going to be more numerous. And if you look at animals, for example, you might have a nice dog. Well, what does the dog act out of? The dog acts out of desire for food, desire to mate, unless you've neutered it, running after things, it's acting out of its desires and its angers. It sees someone coming and it barks or bites out of anger or hatred, wishing to, and attachment. And so for animals, it's very difficult for them. Of course, there are dogs who do act out of compassion and so forth. It's not impossible, but it's less common. So this is why it's said that it's easy to fall down and difficult to pull ourselves back up into the higher realms. So that's just the nature of samsara. This is what when we talk about samsara in Buddhism, this is what we mean. It's important to remember that in Buddhism we're not saying that there is someone who is punishing you for doing bad deeds and sending you to hell. It's very different than the Abrahamic religions, the Judeo-Christian or the Islamic. Judaism, it's hard to say that this is a Jewish idea. Judaism is complicated. But certainly in Christianity and in Islam, the idea that there's a hell and that there's a heaven and that God will judge you and send you one way or the other. In Buddhism, we don't say that. We say it's a result of your own actions. If you do good, if you cultivate good actions, they will lead to good results in the future. If you have good motivations, or if you have bad motivations and do bad actions, they'll cause suffering in the future. It's a kind of a more cause and effect, like we see in the material universe around ourselves. So if you take the material universe as described by physics and science, and then you add the Buddhist ideas of karmic cause and effect, you can see that they fit together actually pretty well. Pretty well. So that's the idea of samsara. So when the Buddha achieved enlightenment, when he was trying to achieve enlightenment, what he was looking to do, he saw the nature of samsara. He understood this, and he wanted to find a way to find freedom from it. And so he did meditation. As I mentioned in one of the earlier talks, he practiced austerities for many years, found that didn't work. He tried all of the different popular meditation practices of his day, found that they didn't work, and then he decided to sit under the Bodhi tree and meditate until he achieved enlightenment. And when he did this, he slowed his mind down and he looked at his experience and he saw what it was. And he saw the nature of the world being like the Four Noble Truths. And he was able, because of seeing the nature of the Four Noble Truths, he was able to cleanse himself of all of the subtle habits of greed and hatred and delusion and pride and so forth. So in other words, by cleansing himself of those, then he was able to be free of them and everything that they produce. This is how he became a Buddha. So So when you talk about becoming a Buddha, it means that when you see the nature of things as they are, then all of the confusion and all of the results of confusion can no longer really affect you. You're freed from in that sense. Because the Buddha saw the nature of the world entirely when he was sitting in under the Bodhi tree, he was able to gain what we call nirvana. So nirvana could be translated as release. Some people translate it as unbinding. What it means is like releasing you from all of the strictures of samsara. This is what the Buddha found. And then he went and he started teaching Buddhism. And as I've mentioned in the previous talks, he basically ended up teaching 3 levels of teachings, 3 levels or vehicles of teachings. So the first one that he taught was what we call the foundation vehicle. And then the second was the Mahayana, or the great vehicle, and the third was the Vajrayana, or the Vajra vehicle. So we've been speaking primarily about the teachings of the foundation vehicle in the last few weeks. So the foundation vehicle, these are like the teachings that all Buddhists accept. Samsara and Nirvana, the idea of karmic cause and effect, the Four Noble Truths, and these basic ideas that we've been speaking about. So now here we come to the question of, well, when we want to achieve nirvana, what do we mean by nirvana? It's like release. Release from what? Well, it's release from the suffering. By practicing meditation and then coming to see the nature of the world as it is, then you're able to uproot the ignorance that causes you to act out of greed, hatred, and delusion. When we act out of greed or hatred, it's easy, I think, to see when you're acting out of anger. Almost every time we get angry, if you really think about it later, when you get angry, are you acting out of a clear mind? Or is your mind a little bit confused? Think about it. Think about the times you've been angry. When you're angry, usually I think most people, I'm going to give you the answer. Don't believe my answer. Look for yourself. Right? What I find for myself is that when I have been angry, I've almost always misunderstood the situation. Anger is based on misunderstanding. And fundamentally, that misunderstanding, according to the Buddha saw that we think that our body and our mind are either me, or they're mine, or they're the basis for me. Something. We grasp at there being a real solid me, an enduring me. But that this is an illusion. When you have an idea of a me, then you have an idea of others. And when you have others, then you can react to them out of attachment or out of aversion. And acting out of that gets the whole sequence of samsara, starts the whole sequence of samsara. So the Buddha, sitting under the Bodhi tree, realized that there's no me. And then he continued to see more and more deeply until he was able to free himself of all the different types of ignorance and afflictions and obscurations that prevented him from achieving liberation. And he achieved liberation. He achieved nirvana. So this is the basic goal of Buddhist practice, is to achieve release or nirvana or liberation. And the way we do this is by seeing the nature of the world so thoroughly, and then cultivating it and meditating on it so thoroughly that we uproot all of our habits of ignorance, and then all of the greed, hatred, and so forth, and all the misunderstandings that come out of that, so that we then gain wisdom. And by having that wisdom, then when you have that, then because you no longer have the causes of samsaric actions, which would be greed, hatred, and so forth, then you would no longer experience the results. So you're released from samsara. So that's what we mean by nirvana. It's liberation or release from samsara. So here there are different ideas about what we mean for release from samsara. in the different schools. And in the basic foundation, the teachings of the foundation vehicle, essentially the goal is to do this for ourselves. And I think this brings up an important point. I've had a few people in the last couple of months who have asked me about, they've been Christians or former Christians or people who are interested in Christianity who have asked me, is there Buddhist eschatology? They often use this word. And it took me a while to figure out what people mean by eschatology. So in Christianity, eschatology is the idea that this world we're currently in will come to an end, and then there will be a new world, a new city, a new Jerusalem, or a new whatever that will come out of that. This is the Christian idea. So in Buddhism, how does it work? In Buddhism, it's not like we have that same idea that the world will come to an end and we'll all go on to some better place. Instead, in Buddhism, we teach that it's each individual. Each individual has the potential to achieve nirvana. And each individual, in fact, at some point in the future, probably will achieve nirvana. And it happens one individual at a time. When one being achieves nirvana, then the other beings around them don't necessarily achieve nirvana at the same time. Because it's individual. We have to do our meditation ourselves. So this is, in a sense, achieving the liberation for yourself is the first goal of Buddhism. But it's not the only goal. Because each individual sentient being has to achieve liberation or on their own. If they're going to achieve it, they have to do it on their own. But those who have achieved liberation have a choice. They can come back and help, or they can just enjoy being in nirvana, whatever that is. And I think it's difficult for us to understand. So this is, I think, the main difference when we talk about there being three different schools or three different vehicles of Buddhism. The main difference between the foundation vehicle and the great vehicle, or the Mahayana, is that in the foundation vehicle, the idea is the main goal of practice is to achieve liberation for yourself. I want to achieve liberation. And this is a good goal. So the Buddha taught this because it's a good goal for people to pursue, and a lot of people have been able to follow his teachings and achieve various degrees of liberation and even completely nirvana. And this tradition is still passed down in the Theravada school, and people practice it and they gain results from it to this day. These teachings are still here. They're very good teachings. And the people who And it's not like the people in the Theravada school are solely selfless, or solely selfish. It's not like they're only working for themselves. They do continue to teach and spread Buddhism and help people deal with their lives and achieve liberation. But the ideal is to achieve what we call the state of an arhat, someone who's destroyed the enemy being our ignorance and all of the greed, hatred, and so forth that come from that. In the Mahayana, though, the ideal is a little bit different. Instead of wanting to just become an arhat, we want to see, can we become a Buddha ourselves? And the difference comes, are we thinking only about our own liberation, or do we start thinking about other sentient beings as well? So in the Tibetan tradition, where the Tibetan tradition, the East Asian traditions, these are all Mahayana traditions, and what that means is that the primary motivation for practice in these traditions is not only to help yourself. We, of course, have to do that. But it's also to sort of think and look and think that actually we have had connections to, if we accept that there's rebirth and an infinite cycle of rebirth, then we have an infinite number of connections with all sentient beings. And for us to only pursue liberation for ourselves and not think about other sentient beings is a little bit selfish. It's like if you go and buy a lottery ticket and you happen to win millions of dollars in the lottery, are you going to keep it for you? Or are you going to share it? That's kind of like right? You could keep it for yourself. Okay, you have to give a certain amount to the government, but that was your motivation. So the idea of Mahayana Buddhism is that there is samsara and that all beings can be liberated from samsara. So what can we do to help all sentient beings? We're not liberated ourselves, but we can help. We can develop compassion. We can develop what we call the motivation of bodhicitta. We can go through the stages, and eventually we ourselves can also develop the same levels of realization as the great beings, the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas. And so this is the main difference between the two. This difference in motivation leads to differences in how you practice meditation, the conceptual framework, or what we call the view for how you practice meditation, because there are differences in the scriptures, and they really come down to this basic motivation. If your goal is to achieve liberation from yourself, that's a relatively simpler task than becoming a Buddha and being able to help all sentient beings. On the other hand, becoming a Buddha and helping all sentient beings, whatever that actually means, is not something that's impossible for any of us as long as we decide that we want to do it and put the effort in and make a commitment to do it, understanding that it's not necessarily going to happen here and now in this lifetime. It could, but it might take a long time. And so you make the commitment that no matter how long it takes, we want to achieve that state and help all sentient beings. So this is like the basic difference, that motivation, and then it has many other ramifications in terms of how the basic Buddhist teachings then developed in the different traditions, in the Mahayana tradition and the Theravada tradition. Now, since I was talking a little bit about eschatology and Christian ideas a few moments ago, I thought I ought to maybe also say something about the idea of, is there a God in Buddhism? What is the Buddhist idea of God? And so in Buddhism, we certainly don't deny the existence of God or gods. In the Buddhist scriptures, we see a lot of stories that involve the Hindu gods. And there are plenty of stories where Indra comes to see the Buddha, usually called by another name called Shakra, but it's really the same deity. There are stories about Brahma and the other deities. They're common figures in the Buddhist literature because they were common figures in the in the Indian tradition. Excuse me for a moment. Excuse me. So we don't really deny that there are gods that there are gods plural. They're commonly accepted. But even in the Hindu tradition, they talk about there being a creator God. And so here in Buddhism, we have a different idea. And we say that everything is created by karmic cause and effect. People are reborn in one place or another because of causes and conditions. We can look at the physical world and we can see that operates entirely from causes and conditions. You can look at your own mind and you can see that one awareness in one moment leads to the awareness in the next moment. So any awareness that you have depends upon causes and conditions, the physical things that impinge on your senses and make you feel something, then you have a thought about it that leads to more thoughts. So everything we can see in our experience is cause and effect. And so Because in that sense, everything is a result, and so that all had causes, the previous instant and the previous instant, going back and back and back. And there's no need to say that there was some original first moment. In fact, you can't find a first moment. This is, in Christianity, there's you had St. Thomas of Aquinas's talk about there having to be a prime mover who started the universe. The universe couldn't have started without someone to get it going, and that must have been God. That is what St. Thomas of Aquinas said. Well, Christian theologians actually showed that is a difficult argument to keep, because what motivated God? There was some cause. And so in Buddhism, we're not denying the existence of God, but maybe saying that the role that a God plays is different. There is no sense of a creator God, nor is there a God who would be a judge. There's no judgment day when you're sent up or down depending upon your actions in this short lifetime. So sometimes I think in Buddhism we think that there must be some sort of a God because it's so common to other religions, and yet in Buddhism we don't deny, but it's not necessary for how the world actually works, if you look at how the world works. And that's what we're really concerned with. You can look at the causes and conditions in our mind and in the physical world and see how things go. And if we see this, then it's hard to see how some creator God could have played a role in this logically. And I don't need to go through all the details of the traditional Buddhist logics, but the descriptions of this. But basically, it's just not necessary. In Buddhism, we say that everything comes out of an infinite cycle of karmic cause and effect. And because everything happens in an infinite cycle of karmic cause and effect, if you understand how the causes lead to results, then you can do things that will bring you to good results. If you do things such as giving, practicing discipline, avoiding killing, and so forth, these are all virtuous actions. And by doing that, then you can bring yourself good results in the future. Just as if you put certain chemicals together, you get a certain other chemical. If you put baking soda and flour and water together, then you can make biscuits that will rise. Right? Similarly, it's with the mind. If you include the mind in there, the mind is just another cause and condition. If you understand how it works, you can bring yourself advantage. You can work with it. So it depends upon ourselves and our motivations and our effort. And eventually, if we work hard enough, we can come to a point where we achieve liberation for ourselves. If we have the vast motivation of wanting to benefit all beings, then we can become Buddhas ourselves. There's nothing that will stop us as long as we have the idea and the motivation. And as we do so, it's kind of a double benefit. A lot of us come into Buddhism wanting to find something that's going to make us happier in this lifetime. So if we start actually doing the things that Buddha teaches in terms of giving up all misdeeds, doing as much good as we can, and taming our mind primarily through meditation, and seeing the nature of reality more clearly for ourselves, then we're also going to bring ourselves benefit in this lifetime. And so that's kind of when we talk about samsara and nirvana, we're in this cycle of karmic cause and effect, and if we don't take control and we let it go as it normally was, and we experience one suffering after another, that is samsara. If we take control and then make the causes and conditions that will lead to the release from that, to liberation for ourselves, and developing the ability to help others, then that will lead to liberation and Buddhahood. So that's the basic idea, samsara and nirvana. And really, it's up to us and up to us and what we decide to do, our own actions in this lifetime. So that's the main. Let me check my notes again, make sure that I got everything I made notes about. I think I've covered everything I thought about speaking already. So, but at this point, maybe some of you have some questions about anything, or if they're not necessary, even if you have questions that are not related to what I was just speaking about, that's fine too. Okay, Susan.
For nirvana, can a person achieve nirvana's status or stage in this lifetime?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the question is, can someone achieve nirvana in this lifetime? And the answer is yes. You just have to do the practice. And we can do it. It's possible, and I think there are lots of records in the Buddhist scriptures of people who achieved nirvana in one lifetime. And I think that in the Theravada tradition, where their ideal is to achieve nirvana for themselves, I'm sure there are still people who are achieving nirvana. But if you do the work and you follow the instructions and you do the meditation, you give up misdeeds and do as much virtue as you can, then there's no reason why you can't.
But how the person know he achieved it?
How does the person know that they have achieved nirvana? There's a story about this. These two monks are off meditating in retreat. Oh, I have achieved nirvana, one said. I've seen the nature. I've removed all of the afflictions. I no longer have any greed or hatred or anything. And the other one said, oh, I have too. And they both thought that they had achieved nirvana. Oh, we have to go tell the Buddha that we have achieved nirvana. They're walking along, and then there's this really nice-looking girl who starts walking by, and they both look at her and they think, maybe I haven't achieved nirvana yet. I've still a little bit of lust there, I think. So, it's kind of hard to tell on your own. You need guidance, someone who can help you. And there are often, like with any spiritual thing, we always think we get to a higher level and then realize that you're not there. So often what we have like three things that often we talk about. We talk about the view, meditation, and conduct. So you have the view is the understanding, the conceptual idea. Meditation is when you do the work and the meditation. And then you have to test and see if it's true. So like those monks had to go out and walk along and see, are they actually free of sexual desire? And they discover that they're not. And then they realize, no. So you sometimes have to kind of test yourself and see. So you meditate until you think you have an experience, and then you need to go into a situation to find out, well, is it actually that or not? There are also levels, signs that you can see in terms of the specific meditation, depending upon what you're doing, the practice that you're doing. And if you're doing a particular meditation practice, then the person who's guiding you should be able to tell you what the signs are to look for saying you've achieved this level or that level. Yes, Joe.
You talked about karma,
Uh-huh.
cause and effect, more or less not dictating but placing you in a different level of life, let's say in the lifetime to come. What influence does it have in this particular life? In other words, if you practiced the awareness of the five aggregates, for instance,
Right.
and in everything that you encounter, and you try to do everything as per what Buddhist teachings tell you, not to kill and to do, to spread awareness and so on. Does that affect you in this particular life? Like you say, for instance, a lot of people say, regardless of they're Buddhist or not, they have this awareness of karma, and they talk about it as if it's all about this lifetime rather than a lifetime to come.
Right. So So the question is basically about karma and how do we experience the results of karma in this lifetime, particularly if we do some sort of practice like practicing the mindfulness of the 5 aggregates or so forth, any of the different Buddhist practices. So the experience of karma in this lifetime, generally in Buddhism we talk about how the fact that we've been born in this lifetime is a result of our karma. Many of the things that occur to us in this lifetime, but not everything, is a result of our karma. For example, if you are born in this lifetime with a congenital heart defect that no one knows about, then at some point you get to the age of whatever, and then that causes you a health problem. That would be said to be a ripening of karma. If you were born next door to a chemical plant, and as a result of that, you get cancer, that's a result of karma. If you were born someplace clean, and you start smoking, and you get lung cancer, that's not a result of karma, that's a result of what you've done in this lifetime. Right? So it's very complicated to sort of say, this is a result of karma, this is not. But in rough terms, you can sort of say, the saying we have in Tibetan Buddhism is, if you want to know what your actions, what your karma of the past was like, look at where you are now. You're in a good position. You're human. We assume you have enough to eat. You're in a comfortable place to be. This is a sign of having done good things in the past. If you want to know where you will be in the future, then you look at what you are doing now and what your mind is like now. So you take care of that. The actions that we do in this lifetime can ripen upon us in this lifetime. They might. We talk about different levels of karmic ripening. There's karma that ripens in this lifetime, karma that ripens in your next rebirth, karma that will ripen in some future lifetime, and karma that's not definite, that might ripen or might not ripen depending upon on the circumstances. And that, all of which level it falls in depends upon the strength of your motivation, the person or being that you're acting with a relation to, the nature of the action, and your intentions in doing. So there are a lot of different factors, and if you have a really strong intention, then it may well lead to a good result in this lifetime. But it's hard to tell. So it's better to be kind of turn it around, and instead of thinking about what the results in this lifetime are and hoping for good results in this lifetime, what's actually more helpful for us in terms of even dealing with this lifetime, forget about future lifetimes, is to instead turn around and look at what are your motivations and what are you thinking about now. Because if you have good motivation and do this, then no matter what happens to you in this lifetime, then you're going to be happy. For example, if you train yourself in being selfless, thinking about others, having love and compassion and so forth, and thinking more about others than you do about yourself, then when something bad happens to you, you're not going to be just sitting there saying, poor me, poor me. You're going to be worrying about others, and then you're going to actually be happier. If you build your whole life around getting more for me, doing more for yourself, and then something goes wrong and you lose everything, you're going to be destroyed. If your life is instead built around the idea, what can I do to help others? And then you lose everything, well, what can I still do for others now? You're not going to worry so much about yourself. Of course, there are gradations about it, depending upon where you are in your practice. But generally, the more you think about others, the more you train in compassion and loving kindness, then the easier this lifetime is going to be. The more you're thinking about me and what you need, what you think you need, or what you want, and what you don't want, then the more difficult this lifetime will be, the more stress you'll have. Does anyone else have a question? Or you can ask, go ahead.
Buddha is not a deity.
Right.
There is no deity in
So if the Buddha is not a deity, or there's no real creator in Buddhism, why do we pray to the Buddha? And this is a very good question. The first thing is that when we make a prayer, or the Buddhist prayers are less an idea of please do this for me, but more of like an aspiration, may I be able to do this, and please help me. So it's not like please make me rich, it's like, or please make me happy, it's like grant your blessings, which means basically help me so that I can become happy, so that I can be healthy, so that I can progress along the path. So the idea is that when you make an aspiration, and you make the aspiration by a prayer, what you're doing is you're making a karmic seed, and you're planting in it inside yourself. And then that seed will grow over time. If you never plant a seed, you're never going to grow a flower, right? Similarly, if you don't make the seeds of aspirations, you're never going to do anything. If you don't decide that you want to, for example, if you have some goal you want to do in this lifetime. For example, if you're young and decide you want to become a doctor, you make the aspiration, I want to become a doctor. Because you have that aspiration, you can then study and become a doctor. You still have to go through school. Likewise, with Buddhism, you make the prayer, please help me, bless me, so that I can achieve Buddhahood. You're making the prayer to the Buddha, in a sense, because of your faith, but you still have to do the work. So that's a difference. When we pray to the Buddha, it's like saying the Buddha is kind of like a witness to our prayer, but we are making the aspiration, we have to do the work. The Buddha helps us, in a sense, by the teachings that the Buddha gave that we can then study and receive and then follow to be able to accomplish what our aspiration is.
In some aspects of Hinduism, there's a Godhead, which is like a heaven. And so I think the idea is you're reborn. Every time you are reborn, you get to another level. So you get to that level of Godhead, like a heaven. Does that exist in Buddhism as well?
No.
So Nirvana has nothing to do with a different level or a spiritual.
No. So the question is, in some schools of Hinduism, they talk about there being a Godhead or a Brahma or a state that you can reach, that we all karmically go through until eventually you reach that state. And Buddhism is different. So in Buddhism, the state of nirvana, it's an interesting one, and there are different ideas about what nirvana is. It's like a release from that. It's an individual thing, but it's not. It's karmic in the sense that if you go through the actions of following the path, you will be able to achieve the results. But it's not a ripening of karma. It's the removal of all the negative karma, the removal of all the defiled karma that then releases you to be in the state of nirvana. When we come to the Mahayana, actually we see that even that state of nirvana is not considered to be separate from samsara. This is a difficult idea to kind of get our mind around. The samsara, the difference between samsara and nirvana is really of a question of how are you looking at your experience. And if you're looking at it in a dualistic way of seeing me and other, and then reacting out of greed or hatred, pride, and so forth, then you're in samsara. If you realize the true nature, the true interdependence of all phenomena, and can rest within that interdependence with the full awareness of it, then that is nirvana or Buddhahood or whatever you want to call it. It's not a different place. You're not going someplace else. It's just greater degree of awareness of where you actually are. So is it time for, you've got another question, Susan. One more question.
Yeah. Is karma neutral word, or there's good karma and bad karma?
Okay.
What karma is bad?
Okay, is karma a neutral word? Is there good karma and bad karma, or is karma necessarily bad? So, if we go back to the Abhidharma studies, Abhidharma is the set of teachings in Buddha where they kind of describe all phenomena. So karma is neutral because it can either be good or bad. You can do good actions and you can do bad actions. But even within good karma, we can distinguish two different types. There's undefiled karma, which leads you to liberation, and then there's defiled karma. So defiled karma is where you have a little bit of a sense of me. You're still thinking it's karma that's still going to produce a samsaric result, because you still have you still aren't free of the craving and so forth that would lead to rebirth, or that would you still have the craving and so forth that lead to rebirth in samsara. So it'll lead to a good samsaric result. So it's good in that sense, but it's not going to lead you to liberation. But you can also have undefiled karma. The karma of certain types of meditation, the karma of certain types of vows and so forth, that then lead you to achieve liberation. So in that way we talk about essentially 4 different types of karma. You've got bad karma, killing, sexual misconduct, stealing, and all that. You've got neutral karma that's really neither one nor the other. It's just kind of nothing. You've got defiled good karma that'll lead you to good samsaric results, but not free you. And then you've got the undefiled karma that brings you to liberation. Yes?
Is the difference between the third and fourth type of karma motivation?
The difference between what is the difference between the third and the fourth type of karma, that is defiled virtuous karma and undefiled virtuous karma motivation? Is that difference the motivation? Partially the difference comes down to motivation. The actual difference comes down to the awareness of how aware you are of the nature of things when you do it. If you do the action with the full, complete awareness of the Four Noble Truths or of the nature of the ultimate truth, then that is an undefiled virtuous karma. If you are doing the action with either a conceptual understanding of the nature of the Four Truths or with no understanding of the Four Truths, then it is defiled karma. So it's a question of the level of wisdom in your mind. So in the Abhidharma, when we talk about the virtuous or the undefiled karmas, what we're primarily talking about are the meditative states of someone who has already seen the nature of the Four Noble Truths. We're getting a little technical for an introductory lecture. I'm sorry. You have a question? Sure. Excuse me, I didn't hear the first part of that.
The difference between defiled and undefiled karma would be like doing something good purely for the sake of it versus doing something good for some kind of benefit.
Yeah, okay. Now that's an interesting. So is the difference between of defiled and undefiled karma the difference between doing something good for the sake of doing something good, or doing it for the sake of some sort of a benefit? This is a very interesting question. So when you do something good for the sake of doing something good, if you at that same time have an understanding of kind of seeing the deep reality of how things are. So when I give the answer and I say if you do the action with the understanding of the Four Noble Truths, what I'm saying is in kind of easier languages that if you have the awareness of the true nature of how things actually are that comes out of meditation, then that would be an undefiled karma. And at that point, you would do good things for the sake of doing good. But that doesn't necessarily always happen. That's still very good to do that. Now, the interesting one is if you do something good, but you have some sort of a selfish motivation to doing it. You give $10 million to build, this is going to be enough money for what I'm saying, you give $10 million to build a library so that your name will be on top of it. I might be out of touch on how much it costs to build a library these days. Maybe you have to give $50 million. You give $50 million to build a library so that it has your name in big letters across the top, and everyone says, yeah. If that's your motivation, is that how do you tell us that a good motivation or not? The action is good, but the motivation is what? Is it really generosity? You have to look at yourself. If your motivation, maybe an easier motivation is if you give someone a gift. You can give them a gift because you like them and just want to give them a gift. You might give them a gift because you want them to like you. And that last one could really be a little bit negative. In fact, you might want to take advantage of them. So to determine whether the action is good or bad, you have to look at your motivation. Are you giving the gift in order to trick them? Now, every time, as ordinary beings, every time we act, there's going to be a certain degree of self-interest involved, because we're ordinary beings. So we do what we can to kind of decrease that self-interest and try to act as purely as we can. So all of our defiled karmas do have a little bit of self-interest. And then you have to look to yourself, is it kind of like a positive self-interest in that it's going to be good for you and the other person? Or is it a negative self-interest where you're actually doing something that looks good on the outside with some really, nefarious intent, or some really bad intent that no one else can tell? So that you have to tell by looking at yourself. Does that make sense, or have I gone on too long? Well, we are coming up to 2:45, so we're at the time of our weekly talks where we usually do a little bit of meditation. So let's do that now, and I'll give some brief instructions. So basically, just sit comfortably on your cushion, sit up straight, and you can put your hands either on your knees, or you can put one hand on top of the other in your lap. Sit comfortably, sit up straight. And in our tradition, we meditate with our eyes open. It's a little harder at first for some people. So just sit up straight, maybe looking down at a spot on the carpet a couple meters in front of you, or 1.5 meters in front of you. And just rest. Let your body rest and relax. And then when you feel a little relaxed, just begin to count your breath. So as you breathe out, just notice the breath going out. Count it as 1. You breathe in, then you breathe out again, that's 2. You breathe in, and breathe out again, that's 3. Just count from 1 to 10. Then take a few moments to rest and then start over again. Don't change your breath. Just let it be as it is. Now take a little break. If you find yourself thinking about things, it often happens, it's not a big deal. You just go back to counting your breath. Thoughts come and go. They go if we let them. So when thoughts come, let them go. Don't try to stop anything. Instead of following the thoughts, you just bring your attention back to the focus of the meditation, which in this instance is counting your breath. So let's try this again for a few more moments. So sit straight, relax, and when you feel ready, start counting your breaths. Okay. So that is our talk and meditation for today. And then the last thing we will do together before we go down, there is tea usually served sometime around 3 p.m. downstairs in the kitchen. So everyone is welcome to join us for that. But before we go for tea, what's important to do is to do what we call dedicating the merit. Because if we've done something good by sitting here and thinking and discussing Buddhism, asking good questions and doing a bit of meditation. And so if we want to really be able to have this, be sure it's going to be able to produce good results in the future, the best thing to do is imagine that we're giving it away to all beings. Because if you keep it to yourself, you've got your merit all for yourself. Then you go outside and someone cuts you off in the car and you get angry at them, that anger will cancel out the good thought in your mind, right? The negative cancels out the good. If instead you imagine that you've given it away to all other sentient beings, you're giving all your merit away to every other being, you go outside and you have road rage, okay, that's bad. But your merit hasn't been canceled out because you've given it away. It's no longer yours alone. Another way to think about it on a psychological level is that when we take a moment to appreciate something good that we've done after we've done it, that gives it more of a chance to sink in, right? So you dedicate the merit, you think about the good, you imagine that it goes for the benefit of all other sentient beings, and even on this simple psychological level, it's just like giving a chance for it to really sink more deeply into your being. So let's recite the dedication prayer. It's just one verse. It's the very last page in the booklet, on the book, on page 217. Okay, thank you all very much.